Alright, hello, my name is Brandon Cheatham. I'm going to be doing chapter 1 of Clean Code, first chapter in the book. Basically chapter 1 is all about an introduction to what clean code is, why it's important, and some of the steps that you can take as a programmer to make sure that your code is clean and not dirty. So we'll start off by saying what is code, why do we need it? Well, code is what defines and represents the details of the requirements for each program that we're writing. So without code, we wouldn't be able to hone in on the precise details of what we're doing. And technology is constantly advancing, so in our world, code is always going to be relevant. There are always new languages being written constantly. So as a programmer, you're pretty much committed into being like a lifelong learner. Even the code you may use now and today might get updated. A new language might come out that makes Java obsolete 10 years from now. So you never know what can happen. Possibilities are endless. So like I said, as a programmer, you're going to have to be willing to learn as you go along. And funnily enough, some people actually believe that we're not going to need programmers in the future because after we've coded everything, we're just going to have a system that accepts our requirements and just puts it together for us. But sadly, I don't think that that's going to be the case. So what is clean code? A lot of people have their different opinions on this, but basically clean code is the simplest and most efficient solution to a problem with minimal dependencies. And this is really important because with minimal dependencies, when it comes time to updating, changing, or adding new features to your code, if you have a lot of dependencies, you're going to find yourself having to change a lot of different things too that have nothing to do with what you're actually changing because it's so dependent on many other things. But clean code is also having clear and meaningful variable names. This is also really important because if you don't have clear and meaningful variable names, then you can't know what you're talking about. Someone else will know what you're talking about if they're looking at your code. It just makes sense, to have variable names that represent what you're talking about. And also no unnecessary duplication. If you find yourself doing the same thing over and over, writing the same code over, put it in a method, that cleans it up and reduces the amount of memory it takes and the time it takes to do that. So, and also properly formatted and documented code is really important. For like I mentioned earlier, as a programmer, you're going to be working in teams of people in your career. So you're going to be looking at other people's code quite often, frequently, and vice versa. People are going to be looking at your code. So it's important to make sure that you have a nice looking formatted code and it's documented so when other people look at it, they know what they're looking at. They don't have to spend time wondering, what is this, what does it do? So, leave comments, say what this line does, what that line does, what your methods do, just make it easier for the person next to you to look at your code. Alright, some of the consequences of having dirty or unclean code are, like I mentioned, colleagues will not understand what they're looking at because, you're going to be working in teams and it's just going to slow down overall development. Increased maintenance. This goes back to what I said sort of with dependencies. If you have a lot of dependencies, then you're going to spend a lot of time maintaining your code because there's a lot of things that you have to change as you change other things, so just not good. You're prone to more bugs and errors. That kind of goes without saying because it's not as good as the code could be, so bugs and errors are expected. Your productivity is going to slow dramatically because you're going to spending all this time that you should be developing new features trying to fix your old problems that you could have completely avoided just by having clean code. And this is important because entire companies have literally fallen because they've gotten into a cycle of just releasing new features and versions and having to go back and fix it, and they just fall so far behind that it's just no longer productive and they have to shut it down or form a new team to restructure the entire project, which either way is not good for money or time. Alright, so I think we should look at an example. Right away I'll tell you this is an example of bad code. I'm sure you're looking at it wondering, what does this do? What am I looking at? And if you look at it long enough, you'll be able to find out that it's basically just a short little program that takes a number, asks the user for a number, and takes that number and squares it. That's it. But I've thrown in a bunch of irrelevant variable names and things like that just to, give you an example of what bad code is. So as you can see, I declare an integer bicycle, which makes no sense at all. It's not meaningful. It should be like number or something, we could name it number. And then, let's see, a couple lines down, you see yellow equals keyboard.next. And see, that just doesn't make sense, Just when it comes down to choosing variable names, make sure that you're choosing names that make sense. And, I'm not going to get too far into it because Chapter 2 is actually all about variable names. So I'm not going to go too far into it. But when choosing names, just be meaningful, use common sense. And this is actually the same exact code. And by the way, I failed to mention, if you actually compiled this and plugged it in to Eclipse, it would work. You could enter a number and it'd output that number squared. But looking at the code makes no sense. So this is what it should look like. As you can see, I've got it very well documented with comments above every variable and line of code basically that explains what I'm doing. And so even if I didn't write this, I could easily look at this, or someone else could look at this and know exactly what's going on here. All my variable names are relevant and make sense. I have comments throughout. I'm properly indented. I don't have any ugly white space anywhere. It looks good, It's good looking code. It's clean looking. So that's clean code. So that if we know bad code or unclean code is so bad, why do we write it? Why is it so common? Well, this usually comes down to just rushing, When you've been working on a project or a bit of code for so long and you finally finish it and you see that it works, you're just like, oh, I'm done, turn it in and move on. When in reality, there are probably more errors than you think. You should take the time to do all the necessary testing, which is a very important part of, being a developer. You got to test your code and make sure it works. If you don't test it, then how do you know it works? And you can't just test it a couple times. You have to test multiple cases and just all the different outcomes that could possibly happen to make sure that your code is foolproof. And another thing that I actually really liked reading in Chapter 1, one of the featured people in Chapter 1 said that clean code is to care about the code. And I think that really drives home the point, because if you care about the code, you're going to take your time to make sure it looks good, it makes sense, and it's just good, clean code. Care about it. Okay, so to wrap things up, basically, clean working code, you can have messy code that works, You can throw it together and it works and you don't know how. I've had that happen multiple times, especially as an early programmer. But what separates the good programmers from the bad programmers are the ones that take the time to make it look clean, do all the testing, like I said, comment, and just make it look good rather than just throwing something together and turning it in. And the world needs more clean programmers because, like I said, there's all too much bad code floating around. So we're definitely no shortage of that. So take the time, make your code clean. And quite frankly, when it comes down to it in the job world, when it comes time to getting a career, it's a matter of professional survival. That's a quote directly from the book. If you don't take the time to make your code good, you're just going to get fired. They'll replace you. You're a dime a dozen. So take the time for your own sake and make sure your code is working, it's clean, and it's good. And to wrap things up, it's just going to make the future easier. Like I said, if you have a bad code and you're going to have to go back and, spend time fixing it rather than working forward in the future with new ideas and development, you're going to be spending all your time trying to fix your problems that you could have prevented just by making your code clean. So, I think that'll just about wrap it up for Chapter 1.